Welcome back to another episode of the Next Level Minds podcast. Today's episode is different than most. This is a repost of a podcast that I had the opportunity to be a guest on called Budgeting Redefined by Drew Adams. Really cool episode. Drew interviewed me for his show, and we chatted about budgeting techniques, maintaining a wealthy mindset, how to handle student loans, how to grow in your financial goals, and really at the end of the day, how to keep your right mind when things get a little stressful. So I was super pumped to be a guest on Drew's podcast and wanted to make sure to repost it to the Next Level Minds audience. Other than that, Drew's got a pretty cool app called Weekly, really nice budgeting app where it tracks all of your expenses and income on a weekly basis. Really simple and easy to use. I would highly suggest downloading it. I'll make sure to include the Weekly link in the show notes. And other than that, I wanted to personally thank each and every one of you for taking the time to tune in to this week's episode of Next Level Minds.
So I am here with Chris Chapman. We are in the kind of the shadows of downtown Charlotte. We met at a fintech conference here in Charlotte, and we started talking about personal finance and Weekly and the app and all of that, and we decided to get together to have a chat. So thanks for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I'm really excited to be here, and I think what's really interesting about how we even got connected is when I went to that conference, literally 3 days before, I wrote in my gratitude journal that I go with every morning, I wrote, I will be on a podcast in a month from now. I'll be asked to be on a podcast.
There you go.
And literally 3 days later, go to the event, run into you, and then all of a sudden, here we are a couple months later. So
what's great is we have interest in fintech in common, but also we're of different generations. You're of a younger generation. You're really interested in money. I'm a little bit older. I'm 40. I'm 48 right now, getting anyway, but you are, how old are you?
24.
24. And you're the executive director of Capital Analytics here in Charlotte, and also a podcaster yourself. You do Next Level Minds. Plug, go check that out if you are interested. But so I'm interested, though, in your perspective on money. So one of my first questions is, you're just a couple years removed from college. What has been your personal journey with managing money up to this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So obviously, I think managing money comes in a lot of different phases. Some people started at a young age. Some people started in college. Some people started after college. Every circumstance is different.
And when did yours start?
So for me, I really started, I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, kind of a middle-class family, never really had to stress about a roof not being over my head, but at a young age, starting around 11, 12 years old, I kind of realized that I started to have to pay for some of my own hobbies, things I like doing.
How young?
About 12.
Okay.
So, obviously I didn't have to pay for my own groceries, but, if I wanted to go buy a new skateboard or surfboard or surfing camp, that was really on my dollar.
So how do you make money when you're 11 years old?
Yeah, so it really all started from there. And, 11, 12 years old, and, obviously you can't go get a W-2 job or anything. So my thing was I was like, okay, I cut my parents' grass for free just to help out around the house. I think I'm pretty dang good at it. So you know what? I'm going to make these flyers. At the time it was on was Microsoft Word Art. Mm-hmm. I remember when that was really big before Adobe and all that. So I made these flyers and, just knocked door to door asking if I could cut their grass. What I did was actually a little bit of market research prior and said, okay, this guy cuts it for $40. They're actually an established firm. I'm going to come in $20, take the business on the low end. Uh-huh. So, be knocking on doors, and it got to a point where I was doing that at 12 years old, $20 a yard, 5 yards, making a decent amount of money at that age to start doing what I wanted. So that was kind of the initial phase of really learning what it's like to make money.
Yeah. Did you save that money, or did you spend it all when you were that age?
Yeah. So at first I, just like a typical kid, would go spend it on, fast food or the movies. And then I started realizing like, okay, I'm working pretty hard for this, but, and my money's staying the same. I'm working really hard, but this little, bag that I had a Ziploc bag, it's empty every weekend. So I'm like, why am I working this hard but not having any money? So what I actually did at the time was I wrote down on a, about a computer paper size thing about this big. And I wrote down, my income, which was probably around, $200, $300 a weekend, just from cutting the grass. And then I would write down all like my potential expenses, like, okay, movies, going out to eat here, paying for a burger here, maybe buying, a new, I used to like some surfing brands. So, maybe buying an O'Neill shirt or something. And then I started to actually save, I want to save $50 this week, $100. And it kind of kept compounding on each other.
Okay. Your first budget.
Yeah. First budget. Oh. So it really all started from there. And it was, I'm sure, obviously being in the industry, once you kind of see your money grow a little bit, it kind of becomes addicting in a sense, know? So fast forward from there, you reach high school, and growing up in Charleston, which for those of you that are familiar with that area, it's definitely a area where there is a significant amount of wealth. But as I just touched on prior, I was growing up kind of the typical middle class. And it came to a point where a lot of my friends and colleagues were, getting their first cars. Yeah. They were fortunate to have them given to them by their parents. And at my time, I was like, okay, I don't think this is going to be provided by my parents. So what can I do to get a car? Because I don't want to be that weird kid without a car, Yeah. So my standpoint was I was 16 years old, and I was like, okay, here's a big savings goal I have. I want to get $5,000 for my first car.
Okay.
Which at $5,000, I mean, even at 24, I think is a decent amount of money.
Yeah.
$5,000 at 16 felt like six figures. So really what I did, I applied at Harris Teeter, went in, obviously had an interview. They asked why I wanted the job, and I said, I'm trying to save up for my first car, get some experience.
Okay. So how much does Harris Teeter pay?
Yeah, good question. Let's do the math on this. Harris Teeter paid, let's see. Oh, they started me at $725, and then actually stayed there the whole time. I don't think I ever got a raise.
So. All right, let's assume there's no taxes.
Yeah.
All right, that's 689 hours to save $5,000.
Yep.
And did you do it?
So yeah, what I did, obviously I was in school at the time, so I couldn't work, and I was part-time, so you could, and under 18, so you couldn't work more than, I believe it was 20 hours a week.
Yeah. So that's 34 weeks.
Yeah. So what I did was do the typical 20-hour weeks, and then I would still cut the grass on the side on the weekends. I wouldn't do too many hours. I'd maybe do 2, 3, or 4 max. And then ultimately, after working for about 6 months, I was able to save up the investment that I needed to get my first car.
How'd it feel?
Oh, man, it felt great. 1999 bright red Nissan Pathfinder.
Did you buy it yourself, or did your parents get involved?
Yeah,
I assume they had to be involved.
My parents got involved to find it on Craigslist, and they actually, I wasn't quite there at the 5,000. I think I had about 3,500. Oh. And fortunately, they were like, as a surprise, they were like, hey, we've actually been saving up as well to help you. Oh, which was amazing. So they were very involved in that process, and it felt good, but it felt scary of, wow, this is all my money going down the drain in this car. But obviously, I got my goal, and that was like kind of the first time where I was like, okay, this is what money can do,
Right. And how'd the car turn out, just as a footnote?
Yeah, so the car was all right for about 6 to 8 months, and then it slowly started dwindling down and ultimately gave out. So,
did you end up selling it?
Sold it for parts for like $2,000, and then just got a Ford Explorer after that. So,
okay. Well, let's talk about the next huge decision, which would be college. So student loans are a huge deal for many people. So when you were thinking about college, and did you have to get student loans to be able to go to college?
Yeah, so I spent my first year of school at the College of Charleston, in Charleston, and I was local there, in-state, so I was able to get just some in-state help where I actually only had to pay a couple grand, which wasn't bad at all.
Oh, that's great.
And then after my first year at College of Charleston, I transferred over to Clemson University.
Okay.
Go Tigers for those out there that are fans. And ended up sophomore year still having an in-state scholarship just from having the appropriate GPA, which even really wasn't that high. It was like barely a 3.0, but you were in-state, so they were trying to help you out. Yeah. So ended up having to get some student loans in my name. Ultimately, because of all the scholarships, I ended up graduating Clemson with about, I want to say 13 in student loan debt, and now I'm at about 10. So
yeah, that's a very seems like a modest number considering some of the numbers that I've heard around.
Yeah, and like my thing with that is I think for those out there that obviously are making that college decision and have to get student loans, I think it's kind of auditing yourself. And if you're looking at out-of-state schools, unless they have that one program that an in-state school doesn't, I think a sacrifice may have to be made in order to save, because out-of-state tuition can be $45,000 to $60,000.
Yeah.
And if you're having to get that in student loans, only have a couple of scholarships, I think 5-10 years after you graduate, you're really going to start looking back and maybe regretting that decision just from the amount of debt you would be in.
So did you give it a lot of thought on borrowing that money, or was it kind of a no-brainer?
Yeah, so it was, it got kind of scrappy where, my parents they really had a huge initiative of wanting to pay for my school just because they really valued it. But, they couldn't really pay for it all up front just from their situation. And they were like, is there any way you can help out? And at the time I was working all summer prior to college to save up as much as I could to actually have spending money, going out with friends, paying for textbooks, etc. Yeah. And at that point it was like, okay, I can't really do it in my own money, but obviously there's student loans out there. So it was a pretty heavy decision, I'd say. It was either like, okay, should I even finish school? Do I want to get these student loans? You obviously hear nightmares about it. But, I was actually pretty ingrained in Clemson, very involved in different clubs, organizations. I was like, you know what? An education, I think, in my mind is worth it, especially at a program like this. So I ended up at that point doing what I had to do.
What did you graduate with?
So I was business management and then entrepreneurship.
Okay. So how at $10,000 it seems pretty reasonable. Now that you're a professional and you have you're set up in your job, does the $10,000 debt weigh on you a lot, or is it pretty manageable for you?
No, so I'd say the first year out, I was making entry-level salary, nothing really too crazy. But obviously Charlotte can be significantly expensive, just rent in general, going out to eat, everything adds up. So I'd say the first 6 months when I was just making entry-level, it was a little kind of some overbearing weight at times. Mm-hmm. But I think just like any other situation, I think you really have to look at it as, hey, problems come all the time, but what am I going to do today? What am I going to do this hour? What am I going to do this minute to get me out of this?
So did you try side hustles to back to mowing lawns? No, you can't do that in downtown Durham.
In downtown Durham, downtown Charlotte, right?
Oh, sorry about that. Charlotte.
Yeah, so I'd say side hustle-wise, I flipped a decent amount of things from college on eBay. Actually, when I just first got up here, carried coffee makers, sunglasses, a couple button-downs that I didn't wear anymore, which I don't know why people would wear those because I wore them for about 5 years, but hope they're enjoying it. So, obviously sold some things there. And I think what really helped me out, which obviously I did this at a young age of putting my budget on paper, I think a big thing that helped me out right when I got up here was I made a amazing budget on Excel. I really, I spent a whole weekend because at Clemson, being a business management major, I took a couple Excel classes. So basically, I called my teachers and they're like, "Didn't you graduate?" I was like, "Yeah. Would you mind hopping on a call? I'm actually trying to build out a budget on Excel. Can you look at it? I'm really trying to save." And they're like, "Oh, of course." So some of my old professors actually helped me make a really nice budget. And I say, because of the budget and because of actually seeing where each dollar was going, it definitely took a lot of weight off my shoulders at the time.
Just the knowledge in retrospect. Did you take all of your expenditures and then categorize them in the past and then say, oh, this is what I'm spending now. I need to spend less here versus there? Yeah,
so I think with the budget, it was the first month, I like to call it the trial period. So you obviously have your fixed expenses, rent, cable or internet if you go that route. And then you have your, phone bill, car payment if you have that, insurance. And then you have your variable expenses, which that can be a big slap in the face sometimes, especially when you first move, because variable expenses for me, I have out to eat, groceries, utilities, because those can be variable. I actually have my girlfriend in a separate category, so I know when we go out to eat what I'm spending on her, what I'm spending on myself, and then just a couple other random variable expenses like miscellaneous, etc. And I think looking at the variable expenses, it's like, okay, in July I spent $160 on beer, wine, and alcohol. Do I really need to spend that, or can I maybe scale that back to $90 and then end up saving the remainder amount?
So this is really interesting and dovetails well with why we built Weekly. So I wanted to dive one level deeper on this. So we built Weekly so that it would take your recurring expenses and your recurring income, subtracts that out, gets your discretionary spending amount, and then tries to abstract the categories, lets you sort of mindfully look at what you're spending in the moment, whether it's bringing you joy and whether you're enjoying it, but always keeping you mindful on spending less than one number. That being said, with your categorization of spending, did you always do that in retrospect? So after the money was spent, I went and categorized it and then looked at it? Or did you manage the discretionary spending in the moment? Like, here is $10 I'm going to spend at the restaurant. Let me look at my restaurant category and subtract it out and see if I have any money left in there.
So you're asking if I had separate budgets for each category?
Correct.
Per se? Okay.
And were you mindful in the moment about which category money was coming out of? Or how did you manage that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, what I would do is I would backtrack it from a weekly savings goal. So let's say, for those out there, let's say your saving goal per week is $200 and you're making $600, right? So that means you can only spend $400 that week. Well, you break down, just like Weekly does, you can break down your rent into weekly. So let's say you have $800 a month in rent, break that down into $200, the rest of your fixed expenses. Then at the end of the day, you only have, maybe $150 left in variable discretionary financials left to go out for the rest of the week, right?
Right.
So I would look at that, and then it would just be sacrifices at that point, meaning if Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I had coworkers at the time that wanted to go out to lunch, next thing I know, I just spent $50 in 3 days. That means when the weekend's coming up, I have to sacrifice maybe Friday night and Saturday afternoon lunch because I went out to lunch Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Right.
So
it sounds like you weren't looking necessarily at the category of expenses of the discretionary spending. You were just looking at, I know I only have this much left to spend. Is that correct? Is that true?
Yep. And for the categories for myself, I just have them. I had them and I still have them on there just to know at the end of the month. I kind of do just like any company does an audit. I kind of just audit myself and I'm like, okay, I spent X amount of dollars on out to eat. Could I maybe scale this back a little bit? Maybe I could add a little bit more to groceries and not have to buy frozen this or frozen that. So I kind of like it for myself to have a nice audit.
Yeah, cool. So you're on your own. Mm-hmm. What are some tips and tricks that you have discovered in just spending or saving now that you're on your own? Yeah.
So I think with spending, saving, etc., I think one thing with being wealthy is I think people hear that term and they're like, oh, wealthy equals $1 million. In my opinion, I think wealthy equals being just financially stable. If your car tire pops, being able to buy a $200 tire and not having to check your bank account while you're trying to pay for it at the cashier register. I think that is my definition of wealthy. And in saying that, I think for myself that some really tips I would say is, establish in your mind that you have a desire to be wealthy. And when I say wealthy, it's meaning not being, it's being financially stable for just common situations, right? So I think first establish that in your mind. And, I actually have written it down and said, I am wealthy. I write that down every day just because wealthy habits, right? Continue to have that.
That's cool.
And I think number two, and we were just touching on this prior, is like have a budget, whether it's Excel, whether it's your app Weekly, which I've been messing with this whole week. I really like it. Whether it's, they're a monster now, but whether it's Mint or the other apps out there, you have to track your money. Or like I did when I was 12, track it on a sheet of paper. Just do something to get your money on paper or on some app to really just know where it's going. And number three, I would really say, another tip I'd say is just really, I think checking in on your finances, checking in on just your bank accounts every now and then, checking in on your stocks if you have those. I mean, I asked someone the other day, they were asking me about their 401k, if they should transfer it to a Roth IRA, just in a casual conversation. I said, well, candidly, like, how much do you have in your 401k? And they said, oh, I don't know. I haven't checked it in 3 or 4 years. And, I think a lot of people just kind of just put their money over there and just, check back 3 or 4 years later and like, oh, I guess it's there.
Yeah.
So I think another thing is just constantly always checking. I check my bank account even I don't spend anything. I check all my bank accounts maybe 2 or 3 times a week just so I can continue to have awareness of everything.
Yeah.
And I think another thing too is just in not only just with financial obligations and money and spending and saving, but I think in life too is always just being a continuous learning mindset. So for me, I'm always looking at some online articles on finance on like Forbes or CNBC. I'm really looking at, what books out there can I learn from or listening to podcasts like this. I think with money, it's just like technology. It changes every single day, right? There's so many factors in it. So I think something that's really helped me out is always having that kind of continuous learning mentality.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about buying stocks?
Yeah.
Are you at the point where you're looking at buying stocks, or are you going to pay off your student loans first?
Yeah, so I still invest in stocks. Actually, shout out to my uncle if you're a listener to this. I don't know if you listen to podcasts or not, but anyway, senior year of high school, he introduced me to the stock market just from a brief conversation after graduation. That was actually his graduation gift. He took me down to Scottrade at the time and helped me invest in the stock market.
Yeah. What was the first thing you bought, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah. Actually, I still have some of this stock. Excel Energy.
Okay.
They're kind of like the Duke Energy of the Midwest.
Okay.
Pretty good dividend yield on that. So
yeah,
my first stock was Excel Energy.
Yield,
high dividend yield stock. I think it was like 20 something a share. Now it's about 60. So good return.
Yeah. And come to think of it, your story about the 401k, I can see, in general, I definitely agree with checking in on your money and all that. I personally do it on a quarterly basis. I write everything down, look at all the values and stuff like that of my investment accounts, yada yada. But I can also see the value of putting something in the 401k and almost forgetting that it's there, because it does grow without you looking at it, and you're not tempted to do anything with it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah,
for sidebar.
Sure. That is a good thing with 401ks, especially if I don't think you have to be, very financially savvy to be wealthy. Just for me, I've always just loved the side of money, of learning stuff. I don't think you have to be at that level to be wealthy. I just think it is good to still check up on. And I think that's the beauty, like you mentioned, of the 401k, though, for those people who just want to make sure they're making money and still, having wealth come in. I think a 401k is a good option because you don't have to check it all the time, like the normal stock market sometimes. So
yeah. So on our recent podcast with Dan and I, we talked about areas where spending more money in something that's providing you value can be a net benefit. So, for example, if you find that you need more rest, I'm just making this up on the top of my head right now, but spending your money on a mattress that gives you a restful sleep is an investment in something that's going to give you more energy, make more money in the future. So instead of the mindset of I need to budget, everything I spend on is bad, which makes people fail on budgeting, it's like some things are worth investing more money in, and I just need to discover what those are. Is there anything in your life that you said I need to spend more money here because it actually is a net benefit, even though it's costing me more in the short term? Yeah,
that's a really good question. I would say for myself, and I definitely agree with that point you gave about, if you're budgeting, you're spending, you're like, this is bad. I would say for myself, though, with my job that I have now and just all the networking events I go to, I'd say it's honestly the clothes I wear.
Okay.
Because my role, as you touched on prior, with Capital Analytics, we create annual economic reports on major metro cities. But we do that by interviewing 200 to 250 of the top CEOs, city officials, university presidents in the Charlotte market. Mm-hmm. So with that said, I have the opportunity to be in front of, Fortune 500 CEOs, mayors of different cities every single day. And within that, these people obviously are very high up in their company. They're wearing some pretty nice suits. So I think showing up on mine, especially at such a young age, I think having, a nicer shirt, a nicer suit, nicer shoes really creates a good first impression, right? So that's something that I found a lot of value, which earlier when I first started the role, I was like, I can just wear this, $100 suit I got at Goodwill. But then I slowly started catching on, and I'm like, okay, I might need to spend a little bit more. So
good one. What are some other fun money stories that you have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Man, so at Clemson, just one of the other things I did to get money, because with Clemson, I was really involved in a lot of organizations, different clubs, business associations, or fraternities. So it was really hard for me to work during school, which I ended up doing senior year. But earlier on, before I started working during school, I started giving plasma.
Oh, wow.
Which you've heard good and bad things about that.
I don't know. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so plasma, it's basically, I mean, I'm no scientist, but it's basically the protein molecules in your bloodstream, and there's actually a ton of different organizations out there that will pay you for your plasma because it's such in high demand, because they make a lot of biomedical equipment out of plasma.
And this is different than donating blood.
Yeah, so it's the plasma in your blood.
Okay.
They pay more for.
Oh.
So now I'm talking about this more. It sounds so sketchy, but it's hilarious.
Is it different than donating
No,
blood?
it's basically the same thing. They just somehow through science extract the plasma, and then
Does it leave you more drained than?
It does. It does.
Oh, okay.
So
what was that like?
So yeah, I would donate the plasma, and I mean, it would actually be some good money because it's such in high demand. I mean, you do it 4 or 5 times a month, you're making $350, $400 a month. So it was a really good, I mean, in a way, a really good side gig.
What are the risks?
But yeah, I think it was a funny story because so many people were making fun of me because of it at the time. They're like, oh, you're giving plasma, like, no offense to anyone out there, but isn't that only for people who, are only making $7 an hour, or, the really low blue collar? And I'm like, man, I'm just trying to get all the money I can get. I'm a broke college student. I don't want to be that. So obviously giving plasma was like a huge lesson on humility. And a huge lesson on gratitude, because to be honest, obviously just like any other college kid, I was using that money so I could get to pay for, not only some textbooks, but also pay to go out to eat, pay to go to the bar every now and then, pay to take a girl out, or my girlfriend now, obviously, out for a dinner. But you had people there that I had some crazy conversations with people. I said, hey man, why are you here? And some people would literally be given plasma to pay for their, their cable, or pay for their daughter's textbooks in middle school. And it was just a huge lesson on humility and gratitude that I was like, wow, like I'm over here complaining that I have to give plasma, or want to give plasma so I can go out to eat, or go, have some drinks at the bar with my friends. And this person's giving plasma to pay for their daughter's, middle school textbooks. So huge, just not only money lesson of like kind of having to get scrappy, but also huge lesson on humility and gratitude.
Fantastic story.
Yeah.
So speaking of lessons, if you take going back to your family for a second, what do you think were the first lessons you learned about money in your family? Or maybe what were the first lessons you learned about money, whether they came from your family or not? Where do you think you got those?
Yeah, so I think of a big lesson of what not to do is, again, just don't. I think it's so easy to overspend in today's society.
Right.
I mean, look at the Super Bowl commercials. They're begging you to spend money. Go on Instagram, even for business, you're going on Instagram. People are begging you to spend their money.
But where did you learn not to overspend?
Yeah, so I think just honestly growing up, I mean, either watching some family members overspend and what that did to them.
Okay.
Hearing conversations, no way, shape, or form arguments, but just hearing conversations at an early age through different family members of like, how are we going to pay for this? Or, what are we going to do here? Or even just friends in general that were older than me. I had some college friends at an early age just because I grew up surfing and skateboarding. So you have friends older. Even hearing some college students like complaining about money, I was like, man, there's something with this money thing. It doesn't sound too fun, but I feel like there's a way to make it kind of work for you more. So
yeah, I
think at an early age was like, okay, don't overspend, be frugal. And then I think another big one too was just really, I was fortunate to adopt that mentality of, it takes what it takes, right? I had to get my first car. It wasn't going to be given to me. I had to do what I had to do to get it. So I was able to fortunately have that mentality. And sometimes I think you have to have that with money as well. Let's say you have rent coming up and you're just starting out working. You're not managing your money properly. It's so easy to put that rent on a credit card. But I think if you have that it takes what it takes mentality, then go out, buy some things at Goodwill, flip them on eBay, give plasma, do something so you're not having to just automatically get in debt like majority of Americans.
Yeah.
So
that's good advice. So I'm interested to know, I really like what you said about wealth. I really like what you said about being able, I don't know how you phrase it exactly, but it was being able to afford common expenses easily.
Yeah.
Right. Now that you're wealthy, right? Do you have new money goals, or do having other money goals really kind of get in the way of happiness in some way?
Yeah, so I think with money goals, another big lesson I got probably in college was just watching videos, reading books, articles, was break down your financial goals into 0 to 6 month increments, 6 months to 2 year increments, and then 2 to 8 year increments. Because, for example, I have a goal by 30 years old to have $1 million net worth. So
Okay.
not $1 million in assets, but $1 million net worth, whether it's through real estate, et cetera, et cetera. So looking at that.
If it was a real estate asset, that would still be an asset.
Yeah,
You
but
mean
not
$1
liquid
million
assets.
liquid, yes.
Yeah, not liquid dollar, not liquid $1 million, but just $1 million net worth from
Yeah.
assets.
That's great.
So, looking at that now at 24 years old, I mean, that's a very steep goal, right?
When did you make that goal?
I made that goal. Actually, I went on a hike about 6 months ago and made that goal.
Okay, all right.
So I was hiking in Gastonia, North Carolina, and I was like, I'm going to get serious about it and make some more financial goals. So anyway, you look at that goal at 24, I mean, that's 6 years from now. It's like, okay, like that's a pretty steep mountain to climb, only being 2 years out of school. But I think if you break it down into increments, like I said, monthly, I think it compounds on each other, right? I mean, for example, I had a goal to have over $10,000 in the stock market in 6 months. And, at the first month that felt pretty hefty, but obviously once you start building on each other, once you get to month 3, month 4, it's like, okay, I think this is actually possible. And I think that small example compounds on itself. Maybe when I'm 28, 29, I'm like, wow, I actually think I'm fairly close to this goal. I think I can get there, and it provides much more momentum.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was actually going to ask you the happiness question, or respond to the happiness question. So I think money obviously is such a controversial topic of like, does money provide happiness? Can you get happiness from money? You only care about money. But I think it's knowing when to like turn it off. For example, during the week, I'm very invested in doing podcasts. I'm very invested in work. I'm very invested in looking over my stocks. But, you best believe that when my girlfriend and I are going to lunch or dinner on Saturday, I got my phone turned on airplane mode, not responding to any emails. I'm actually maintaining really good time with her, focusing on the present rather than, sitting here at dinner, picking up my phone, checking an email. I'm actually engaged in that moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I can see how that really helps.
You got to know when to turn it on. During the week, I think, is when you go 120, 130%. But then I think during the weekend, contingent on working on side hustles, et cetera, I think during the weekend when you're spending time with loved ones and family is really when you go all in. And instead of depositing financials into your bank account, you deposit emotional time into that relationship.
Yeah, for sure. So you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, your $1 million goal by 30 is something that you strive for during your work hours.
Yeah.
And you're able to sort of keep your emotional, social hours, not have it interfere with those while you're on that journey.
Yeah, and I think I have, this goal list that I printed out for this episode. I have it. Another key thing, too, is I have it bulleted to my wall. I work from home, so I have it right above my desk. So it's obviously having a constant reminder and having that right in front of you, too.
Can you read some more off of them?
Yeah, definitely. So, 6 months to 2 years, I'd like to have my own house. Not paid off or anything, just I would like to have my own house, to the $400,000 to $500,000 range. Because right now I'm still living in an apartment. And then I would say in 2 to 8 years, I'd like to have 3 rental properties. So actually, that's where the $1 million net worth comes into play. 3 properties that are actually providing me, whether it's Airbnb or actual, 12 or 6 to 12 month tenants. And then another one too, I'd say is being able to put, Dave Ramsey talks about this all the time, but I want to get my emergency fund back up to $6,000.
Speaking of Dave Ramsey, you're at a good time in life to invest in a 401k or an IRA. You know this already, but I'll get the exact numbers wrong, but the gist of it is pretty right. Where if you can save money, like from your year, let's say 21 to 28, and when I say save money, I can't remember if the number is $5,000 a year or $10,000 a year, maybe even $2,000 a year, and then you stop, and then that's person A. So person A does that, and then the other person starts and picks up at age 28 and goes all the way to 65, saving that same amount of money every year, the person who saved from 20 to 28 or whatever the rough numbers are will have way more money than the other person who saved for way longer. And it's the power of compounding interest. And the money that we're talking about here is in the millions.
Yeah.
Like just by saving whatever that number is, 5, 10, 2,000, 5,000, or 10,000 a year in those early years, you will have over $1 million, well over $1 million when you retire. And that's it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I think breaking it down like that makes it so much easier to grasp, because $1 million sounds like a hefty amount of money at a young age like this, right? So to your point there, I actually read that as well. I think it was if you started at 22, 23, which is the average age right out of school, and then invest, I believe it's five or six grand a year at a normal S&P 500 average return at 9 or 10%. Then I think it was like at 55 or 60, you'd have, I believe it was $1.5 million.
Yeah. So it won't be by 30, but that's a real lesson.
Yeah.
Because if you can do it, like you will have your long-term self will be set. And it does, and that's even if you turn it off at it, which you're not going to.
Yeah.
You're probably going to go all the way through.
Yeah, and I think too with that goal, right? I think your experience with your career compounds on each other. So, I've met some people that are 26, 27 through some, pretty decent jobs at some of the Fortune 500s around here, making $250,000, $350,000, $400,000. And, I think if you can get your skill set up to that level, or put yourself in the right opportunities to make, even $100,000 and actually are frugal with your spending up into your pretty frugal with your spending up into your 30s, I think that's a very achievable goal.
Yeah. So, why don't we take a second and you talk about your podcast? I'd like to hear more about that. What are some of the best lessons you've heard from your guests? And if you could describe the podcast for our audience.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. So the podcast that I run is Next Level Minds. It's a business entrepreneurial podcast where I really walk through people's stories of how they have gotten from point A to point B, overcame adversities along the way. So I know everyone likes to really broadcast their destination, but at the end of the day, what did it really take to get there, right? So these are the stories that I like to unpack with, founders, entrepreneurs, creators, executives, whoever I'm sitting down with that just has a story of really getting from that point A to point B. And I think some really big lessons that I've learned along the way, and this is actually my first episode, a good friend, Mike, he said, you got to put the horse blinders on. And I said, what do you mean by that? He's like, think about it, man. You're scrolling on Instagram, you're scrolling on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. You're looking at kids that are out in California making, $1 million at 25. How do you think that's going to make you feel about your goal? And I was like, pretty dang bad. So he said, when you're first starting out, even when you're pretty far in life, put the horse blinders on, focus on you, right? Focus on what you're doing that day, hour, minute, etc., and how are you getting to that next level, if you will. So I think that was a really big lesson. And then I think another big lesson was with Haley Mae Campbell. So she is a country music artist out of Nashville. She grew up in Charleston, but she's actually blown up recently. I mean, she's got millions and millions of streams on Spotify. She's touring with all the big names. And one of her lessons was, you have to believe and you have to just love your goal or love what you want in life so much that you really back yourself into a corner and basically force yourself to get it done. So for her example, she was like,
yeah, how do you force yourself?
Yeah, so she was like, I always wanted to be a music artist. I always wanted to tour. I always wanted to do this. So she said she had never had a legit full-time job rather than, barista at Starbucks, cashier, hair cheater, stuff like that, and basically forced herself to have to go that route. So I think that's a little extreme, but I think that's true with...
By not getting a more steady salary.
By not getting a more... Because then you get comfortable, right?
Yeah.
I think, and that's a lot of the things out there with entrepreneurs is like you hear people, and I think you still have to be safe with it, but you hear people, selling their car or selling their house or to build their business. I don't think you have to go that far all the time, but I think you do have to make some really big sacrifices along the way to really get to that next level, whether it's with your finances, your career, your business. So
can you tell me about the gratitude journal that you mentioned?
Oh, yeah. So I actually started that process right when I moved to Charlotte, just because, I'm blessed to live downtown, which is amazing. But at the same time, it gets very hectic of walking, people running into you. You know, it's not New York City, but it sometimes feels like a miniature New York City. So I was like, man, I'm getting kind of overwhelmed here. I got to really find a way to just stay more grounded. So my gratitude journal is a journal that I write in every day. So I write in one thing I'm thankful for, which it could be something small. I mean, today I wrote down, I'm very thankful that I was able to go to the gym before work and eat a bowl of oatmeal. It's super simple, but a lot of people can't go to the gym because they're injured. A lot of people don't have money to eat breakfast. So you're breaking it down so much. And then after the gratitude journal, I write down just a power list, where I actually got this from another podcast called MF CEO Project by Andy Frisella. He basically says, make a power list, 5 critical tasks that you're going to accomplish that day that are going to exponentially move the needle in your life forward, in your business, career, relationships, whatever you want to focus on at that time. So then you write down a power list. And honestly, I don't have my journal in front of me, so I'm not going to remember my power list from the day. But one of them was be on this podcast, so there's at least one.
That's cool.
But yeah, write down the power list. And then at the end of the night, end of the day, whether it's, and I'm big on personal development. It takes time. It obviously is an investment in yourself. So with that said, no matter what time it is, whether I'm done working at 11 p.m., 12 a.m., 1 a.m., or 6 p.m., I'm taking the time at the very end of the day, right before I go to sleep, to pull out the journal and write down, 1 to 3 more things that I'm thankful for that happened that day.
Okay.
And then I always write down, tomorrow will be a great day, as like my last line.
Nice.
Because, think about it. Just going to bed as the last thing you wrote down, the last thing you said to yourself, saying tomorrow is going to be a great day, you wake up just exponentially in such a better mood.
Wow. Did you come up with that yourself?
Yeah. I've heard a lot of different podcasts of people doing journals, affirmations, and I kind of just made a custom tailored solution for myself. So
I love it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So anything else I should have asked, or any other story you'd like to tell about yourself or money?
Yeah. So I think I'm big on, as I touched on a lesson I learned from Mike on my podcast, Next Level Minds, and I struggle with this too sometimes, is really try your best not to compare yourself to others. Because, for example, I was stressing that, I don't think I should be, because it's not the most humble comment, but, I'm like, oh, I wish I had 6 figures in the stock market right now. Obviously, I'm pretty far from that. But, the other day I was in a conversation at a networking event, talking finance with this guy. We just started opening up, and he's like, man, I'm super excited. I just got my first $2,000 in my savings account.
Yeah.
And he was 26 years old. And hearing the excitement on his face, I think it's like, okay, like there's obviously hundreds of people 10 times better position than I am, but there's probably a lot more that are worse off than I am at this situation. So I think looking at it is, I'm blessed to be where I'm at, but I'm always trying to take it to that next level.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for this, Chris. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me here to the podcasting room. We're here in downtown Charlotte, and I look forward to keeping in touch and listening to Next Level Minds. And we should touch base again. I'll be really interested to talk to you when you turn 30. I'm going to say, how's it going on that $1 million goal?
I didn't make it. No, like,
you may be way above it. Who
knows? That's the crazy thing about life. You never know what's going to happen. I never would I thought 2 years ago in college that I would be in a job that I speak with 200 of the top CEOs in the Southeast. So I think just another kind of final learning lesson is you never know where you're going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Just honestly keep pushing towards the goal you have, and obviously stay grounded in gratitude. So
yeah, for sure. I really love the way you defined wealth. I think that's so important. It just feels good to define it in that way, and you say, you know what, everything is fine now. I'll get to wherever I'm going to go next.
Yeah.
I'm good with where I'm at now, and I'm going to enjoy the journey to try to get to the next spot if I want to.
Exactly.
I feel like that's healthy.
Yeah, enjoy the spot you're at. Enjoy, the journey along the way, and then again, just touching on my definition of wealth again, because I know you like that piece. Was just wealth is being able to afford common expenditures that come up, and obviously also wealth is having knowledge of your personal finances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the other piece.
So
yeah, cool, very cool.
Yeah, right. Thanks, man. I've really enjoyed being on the show. Everyone out there, listen to Next Level Minds if you have a chance. Episodes every other Monday. It's on Apple, Spotify, and is it the Google Play Store as well. So.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Thanks, man.
All right.